Scrape marks on the metal edge of the grate, fresh bright silver, through the rust clustered in one spot, as if the same impact had been repeated 6 or 7 times. Not from Lily's concrete block last night, from something smaller, from someone testing the grate's stability, making sure it would hold against someone pushing from below. Someone was checking it, Lily said. She wasn't talking to anyone in particular. She was just narrating what her eyes were telling her, the way she'd taught herself to do when she needed to think clearly and there was no one reliable to think out loud with. Multiple impacts, same spot. They wanted to know if the grate would stay down. Duke crouched beside her. He looked at the scrape marks without touching them. Then he looked at the edge of the curb, a fresher chip in the concrete roughly 8 inches from the grate. Gray dust in the crack, the color of something poured recently rather than worn away over time. They poured here, he said. This edge. Someone laid something along this side to weigh the grate down from above. He rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, the gray dust leaving a faint smear. Recent. Everett was already photographing everything with his phone, moving around the perimeter of the drain in a slow, methodical arc. The worker in the neon vest had been watching them from down the block since they arrived. He finally started walking over, stopping about 8 feet away, holding his clipboard against his chest like a shield. "Can I help you folks?" he asked. His voice was the voice of a man who did not want to be involved in whatever this was. Everett looked up. "Name?" The worker blinked. "Tom Wicker, City Maintenance. I'm assigned to this block today." "Mr. Wicker, did your crew install any chain or locking hardware on this drain in the past 72 hours? Tom Wicker's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "No, we don't. That's not a thing we do. Drains don't get locked." "Are you aware of any work orders for this location in the past 30 days? Tom shifted his weight. His eyes moved to Duke's bikes parked at the corner, did a quick evaluation of what he was looking at, and came back uncertain. "There's a project on Clement 2 streets over, Creston Seville. They've been doing stormwater regrading. Some of the drainage in this area got affected by their work. The runoff pattern changed. Last night, everything backed up." Lily stood. "How far does their site go?" "They've been cutting a new channel behind the grocery, redirecting flow toward the Eastern Basin." Tom hesitated. "Except the Eastern Basin can't handle what they're sending it. The math doesn't work. I've said that in 2 different maintenance meetings. Nobody," he stopped himself. "Nobody what?" Duke said. Tom looked at the drain, then at his boots. He was quiet long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. Nobody from the county side wanted to hear it. Tom Wicker looked at the grate for a long moment, at the scrape marks, at the gray dust on the curb edge. Something moved behind his eyes, not courage, exactly more like the moment when avoiding a thing starts to cost more than facing it. "Vander," he said finally. "Cole Vander, Inspector for Infrastructure and Drainage." The name dropped into the conversation and sat there. Lily turned it over. "Cole Vander? County jacket, no hard hat, not working, just watching. A man who came out of a white truck and looked at an 8-year-old boy like a problem that needed solving." "What does Vander drive?" Everett asked, still making notes, still not looking up. Tom Wicker said nothing for a moment. Then, with the specific reluctance of a man who knows the answer he's about to give will make the next part of his life more complicated. "White county truck, utility bed, county seal on the door." Lily's skin moved, not goosebumps, something lower than that. The memory of standing in the rain outside the police station with bruised wrists and looking across the road at headlights that weren't on at an engine that was running at a white truck with a county seal that hadn't moved until she'd moved first. "That's the truck," she said. "It was there last night, outside the station. Lights off. It was there when we came out." She looked at Everett. It was watching. Gus, who had been standing at the corner this whole time with his back to them and his eyes on the street, spoke without turning around. "Still watching," he said. They all turned. At the far end of the block, a white utility truck with a county seal on the door had turned onto the street from the intersection, driving slowly. The way a vehicle drives when it's not going anywhere in particular and wants you to know, it knows exactly where you are. Duke didn't move. He watched the truck approach without expression, without urgency, with the specific stillness of a man who has decided what he is going to do and is simply waiting for the right moment to do it. The truck slowed as it reached them, crept past the drain at walking speed, the driver's window up the windshield, catching the flat morning light and throwing it back opaque. Then it stopped. 20 feet past the drain, it stopped. Reverse lights came on. It backed up slowly, deliberately, until it was positioned with a direct sight line to the curb where Lily was standing. Not idling. Waiting. The way a camera waits. Then the engine note changed. A quick, aggressive rise in pitch, like a clearing of the throat before a shout. The truck lunged, not down the street, toward the curb, toward the drain, toward Lily's side of the sidewalk. Time broke into separate pieces the way it does when the body understands danger before the mind has time to process it. She saw the front tire jump the curb, saw water spray off the gutter in a white arc, saw the county seal on the door blur, larger and larger, filling her vision. Duke moved first. He grabbed her hoodie at the shoulder and yanked backward hard. No gentleness in it, just pure physics, and she stumbled and went down on one knee on the wet sidewalk as the truck's side mirror exploded against the metal edge of the grate with a crack that sounded exactly like a gunshot. Glass sprayed, something bit her cheek. The truck's rear end fishtailed back into the street tires, screaming on the wet asphalt. And then it was gone, roaring through the intersection, the utility bed rattling, disappearing around the corner before anyone could do anything useful. Silence. The kind that follows a sound too loud to process. Plate, Everett said, already moving to the curb with his phone raised. Lily was already looking. Her eyes had found the rear of the truck the moment it started to move and hadn't let go. Mud on the bumper, but partially visible through the mud in the last half second before the truck rounded the corner, 73J, and then two more characters she caught and held in her mind like she was gripping them with both hands because she knew she had exactly one chance to hold them before they were gone. 73J-942, she said. Her voice shook. I think 73J-942. Everett repeated it immediately into his phone recording. Gus was already at the corner, watching the direction the truck had gone, cataloging. Duke's hand was still on Lily's shoulder. He looked at her face, at the small cut on her cheek where the mirror glass had caught her, bleeding thin and fast down toward her jaw. He didn't say anything. He took a folded bandana from his back pocket and pressed it against her face with the particular gentleness of very large hands that have learned to be careful. That wasn't intimidation, he said quietly. That was something else. Lily pressed the bandana to her cheek and looked at the grate, at the gouge in the metal edge where the truck's mirror had struck, at the scattered glass catching the morning light. Clean up, she said, not asking. Yes. Duke's eyes didn't leave the corner where the truck had disappeared. He came to see what we know, and he wanted you scared enough that knowing it wouldn't matter. Everett lowered his phone. His voice had tightened by exactly 1 degree, the only external sign that anything had affected him. I'm going to need to make some calls. What just happened on a public street in front of 3 witnesses and a recording device is no longer a local matter. Tom Wicker was standing very still, 10 feet away, his clipboard at his side, now the pretense of routine business having evaporated with the truck's mirror. He looked at the glass on the curb. He looked at Lily's face with the bandana pressed against it. He looked like a man making a decision about who he was going to be when this was over. He didn't say anything. He just took out his phone and made a call, and from the way he turned his body slightly away and spoke quietly, Lily understood he wasn't calling a supervisor. Before they left for the warehouse, Everett looked across the street. Above the door of a narrow storefront with barred windows and a hand-lettered sign reading Webb's Buy-Sell Trade, a security camera sat under a rusted metal overhang. Cheap housing, old mount, paint flaking off the bracket, but the lens was angled directly at the storm drain. That might have caught the truck last night, Everett said quietly. Lily went with Gus. Not Everett, not Duke, just Gus, quiet and unhurried, the kind of man who didn't telegraph what he was doing, even when he was doing it directly in front of you. The owner, Otis Webb, was behind the counter when they came in, a man in his mid-60s with a thick gray mustache and the cautious, measuring look of someone who had operated a cash business on this particular block for 20 years and knew exactly which side of which situations to stay out of. His eyes went to Gus first, did the calculation that people always did when they saw someone built and quiet and watchful, and then moved to Lily. Help you, he said in the tone that meant the opposite. I hope so, Lily said. Your camera. She pointed toward the front window, toward the angle that faced the drain. Last night during the storm, Did it record? Otis Webb looked at her, then at the window, then back. Machine malfunctions in heavy rain. Lightning gets into the circuit sometimes. I don't know if there's anything usable. His voice was careful, not hostile. Careful in the way of a man who has decided to say the minimum required and see where it leads. Lily recognized the register. She'd spent 2 years being careful in exactly that way herself, giving just enough to get through a conversation without giving enough to be caught in anything. She didn't push. She didn't argue. She just told him what she'd pulled out of that drain the night before, not dramatically, not as a bid for sympathy, not the way you tell a story when you want something from someone, the way you tell a fact when the fact is the only thing you have. An 8-year-old boy, a locket grate, the water at his chest, a chain that had been put there by someone who had stood outside and listened and laughed and walked away. Otis Webb was quiet for a long time after she finished. Long enough that Gus shifted his weight, long enough that the sound of the street outside filled the silence. Then Webb reached under the counter and came up with a small, black external hard drive, the kind that plugs into a laptop older model with a crack in the plastic casing along one corner. Main recorder fried him, he said. It does that in bad storms. But I wired in a backup 2 years ago after someone broke the window and I lost the footage. Runs off a separate battery circuit. He set the drive on the glass counter between them. I checked it this morning when I came in. There's something on there from last night. I almost called someone. Then I thought about it, and I almost didn't come in at all. He looked at Lily directly. I've got a business on this block. I know who runs what in this county. I understand, Lily said. I don't think you do, he said, but I'm giving it to you anyway. He pushed the drive forward. Because I have a grandson, he's 7. Gus took the drive without a word. Back at the warehouse, Everett connected it to his laptop, and the footage appeared on the screen. Rain and darkness and the wet curb of Route 9 in the middle of the worst storm Harlow had seen in 3 years. Grainy, shaking slightly with interference, shot through with static. But real, unmistakably, undeniably real, in the way that only actual footage of actual events is real without the clean edges that imagination gives things. The white county truck with its lights off, sitting at the curb in front of the drain, sitting there the way something sits when it is not parked, when it is positioned. The engine running, the lights off, the driver's window up. Then the lightning came, one hard, white, total flash that lit the street like a flashbulb in a dark room, and in that single frame for less than a second, but enough through the water-streaked windshield to face. Everett turned the screen so Lily could see. She looked at it. Cole Vander, behind the glass, watching. The camera in his face was the same camera she'd been looking at from across the street 30 minutes ago, before he'd tried to use 2 tons of county property to end the conversation she hadn't finished starting. That's him, she said. Yes, Everett said, and he started making calls. They went to the warehouse, a property behind a chain-link fence with a keypad at the gate and a faded trespassing sign on the posts, the kind of property that looked like nothing from the street and was exactly what it needed to be. Inside, a trailer office with a map on the wall, a generator humming in the back, and the smell of old coffee and the particular purposefulness of a place where people work through the night. Gus confirmed the plate within the hour. County fleet vehicle assigned to Cole Vander Infrastructure and Drainage Oversight. Current assignment, Creston Civil Development Project, Clement Street, Harlow. Then Everett found the other thing. He didn't announce it. He went still for a moment, reading from his tablet screen, the specific stillness of a man who has just landed on something he was hoping not to find, because finding it means the situation is worse than he'd calculated. Then he set the tablet on the desk and turned it to face Lily without framing it or prefacing it. It was a county administrative record, an application for emergency housing assistance filed with the Harlow County Welfare and Infrastructure Office, the kind of form you filled out when the shelter wait list was full and you had nowhere else to turn, filed 2 years and 3 months ago, by a woman named Carol Ward. Lily's hands stopped moving. The form had been denied. Reason given: insufficient documentation of county residency. Signature on the denial authorization, C. Vander Infrastructure Office. Everett's voice was measured. Careful. If the application had been approved, your mother would have been eligible for transitional housing placement. There were 2 units available at that time. She would have had an address. she would have had access to the medical services attached to the placement. He paused. The denial was issued 4 days after the application was filed. Standard processing time is 6 to 8 weeks. Lily looked at the signature. The C, the V, the bureaucratic neatness of it, the way a man can end someone's options with a pen stroke and never have to see what the ending looks like. Never have to be in the room when the door closes. Never have to hear the sound that follows. She had known in the abstract way you know things you haven't let yourself fully feel, yet that her mother's death was not simply bad luck. She had known that the word system was not a neutral word, that it had authors, that behind every door that closed in the wrong moment, there was a hand that had closed it. She had carried that knowledge at a careful distance because the full weight of it carried up close was the kind of thing that could make you stop functioning entirely. Now she was sitting 3 feet from the name on the piece of paper that had closed one of the last doors her mother had tried to open. She didn't cry. She pressed the bandana against her cheek and looked at the signature for a long time. Duke, standing in the doorway of the trailer, heard none of this because there was nothing to hear. Just Lily looking at a piece of paper. But he looked at her face and he understood the nature of what she'd found, the way people who have carried their own weight for a long time can recognize that weight in someone else's posture. His right hand, the one resting on the doorframe, the Celtic knotwork across the knuckles, the old scar running along the base of his thumb, closed once into a fist and then opened again, slow and deliberate. Lily set the bandana down on the desk. She looked up at Everett and said with a steadiness that came not from the absence of feeling, but from the decision to use feeling as fuel rather than let it become a weight. Okay, then let's finish it. The afternoon brought the shelter. Lily went with Gus. She'd made the argument for going alone, and Duke had said 2 words no, and Gus, and that had been the entire negotiation. They parked across the street, and Lily understood immediately that something was wrong. On a regular weekday, the line for the shelter's meal program started at 7:30 and ran to the door. The sidewalk was empty. 2 patrol cruisers sat a block down, engines idling, doing nothing specific, just occupying space, just being visible. Nora Steck appeared at the shelter door, looked both ways down the street with the quick, involuntary scan of someone who had been frightened recently and hadn't fully stopped. And then she saw the car across the street and her face did something complicated. I put it in the donation storage room in the back so they couldn't use it as a reason to search the premises. She looked at the sidewalk. It was gone by this afternoon. Lily said nothing for a moment. Someone with a badge, Nora whispered. I didn't let them search. I swear I didn't let them in officially. But someone went through the back and It's okay, Lily said. It was not okay. Her bag was the physical proof that she existed, the photograph, the library card, the soap in the Ziploc bag, everything she had carried and organized and protected through 2 years of living without walls. It was gone because someone with a county ID had decided to use it as leverage. Take the anchor, make the person float, make them easier to move. But she said it's okay because Nora Steck was standing on the curb with her arms crossed tight over her stomach, trying not to cry, and there was nothing useful to be gained from the full truth of how not okay it was. Gus pulled out before the patrol cruisers had time to decide they wanted a closer look. Back at the warehouse, the spare phone Everett had given Lily buzzed. Unknown number. 1 line of text. We know where the girl sleeps. Shut your mouth. She read it twice. Then she carried the phone to the trailer door and held the screen out to Everett without saying anything. He looked at it. He forwarded it to 3 different contacts before she'd walk back to the chairs too legal. One she didn't recognize, and then he looked up with the expression of a man who has just been given exactly the kind of evidence that changes the shape of what he's building. Witness intimidation, he said, in writing, from a traceable number, on a device we can document. He set his own phone down on the desk. This is no longer a county matter. This is federal territory. Duke stood in the trailer doorway and looked at Lily and said nothing for a moment. Then they're cutting every line they can find. The shelter, the bag, the text, they want you without anchor, without record, without anyone who will pick up the phone for you. I know what they want, Lily said. Then you know what comes next. She did. She'd been watching it build since the moment the padlock broke. They were going to try to put her somewhere quiet, somewhere she couldn't speak from, Somewhere the story ended before anyone heard it. The evening brought the trap. Lily's bag reappeared. One of Everett's contacts at the shelter called someone had left it propped against the curb near the Route 9 drain. Right where she slept. Right where she would go if she needed it. Positioned with the specific care of something staged to look accidental. Duke said, "Don't go." Lily said, "I know it's a trap." Then we agree. "I also know," she said, "that if I don't go, he thinks I'm scared enough to stay quiet. And if he thinks that he stops making mistakes, he gets careful, he waits us out." She looked at Duke directly. "He's already tried to buy me, run me down, and threaten me by text. He's getting louder. Louder means more exposed. I want him louder." Duke looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that isn't skepticism and isn't approval, but is the particular evaluation you apply when you're deciding whether someone has earned the right to make a dangerous decision. His thumb moved across the scar on his hand once, then was still. Everett said, "We go smart, we go recorded, distance and discipline. If Vander is baiting her in public, he's either desperate or he believes he's untouchable. Either way, he exposes himself." Duke said, "She does exactly what you say. If you say stop, she stops." Lily said, "I understand." They went at dusk. Everett and Lily in the old sedan Duke, 2 blocks back in the pickup, 2 bikes positioned wide and quiet on the parallel streets. Not close enough to announce. Close enough to converge in under a minute. The overpass was dim in the failing light, the day burning off into a flat gray dusk that made the familiar street look like a photograph of itself. The drain sat in its ordinary position on the ordinary curb, and beside it, propped against the concrete lip, exactly where someone would leave something for her to find, was her bag. She could see the silver duct tape on the strap from 15 feet away. She could also see the coil of chain on the sidewalk next to it. Fresh, still faintly damp as if it had been rinsed, laid there like a signature, like someone's idea of a message. "He's here," she said quietly. Everett raised his phone and began recording without a word. The footsteps came from behind a parked SUV, measured unhurried, the footsteps of a man who has decided he controls the timeline. Cole Vander stepped into view wearing the county windbreaker and the face of someone conducting routine business. 2 men flanked him, both in dark clothing, both with the particular build and the deliberate stillness of men who had been hired for exactly this kind of quiet errand. The one on the right kept his right hand low near his waistband. Vander's eyes went to Lily first, then to Everett's phone, then back to Lily. "Evening," he said, the tone of a man running into a neighbor. Lily kept her eyes on his face. She thought about the county signature on her mother's denied application. She thought about Owen in the dark with the water rising. She thought about the laugh, the sound Owen had heard when the lock clicked shut while a child was standing in rising water in the dark below. "Let's talk about what you think you saw," Vander said. Everett's voice cut in steady and audible. "Deputy Inspector Cole Vander, confirm your name for the record." Vander's expression didn't change. "You're still playing lawyer." "I'm playing witness," Everett said. "Different game." Vander took a slow step closer to Lily. His hands were loose at his sides, the posture of a man who had done this before and found it effective. "You did something real the other night," he said. "Pulled a kid out of a drain. Town's going to hear about that. Real heroic." His eyes moved to her bag beside the curb. "But then you started saying things about trucks, about locks, about me." His gaze came back to her face. "That's where your luck runs out." Lily didn't answer. She was thinking about his voice, about whether she'd heard it before, whether the laugh Owen had described had been this voice measured and certain and comfortable with itself, whether the calculation behind his eyes was the same calculation that had weighed an 8-year-old child against a drainage contract worth millions of dollars and found the child less important. "You want a deal," he said. She waited. "You say you panicked. You broke the lock to help and made it worse. You made up the truck story because you thought it would get you a payout." His voice stayed warm, reasonable, the voice of a man offering something practical. "You walk away with Hosh, with a real bed, with paperwork that says you exist." A pause. "Or you don't, and I make sure there isn't a shelter in this county that opens a door for you. I make sure juvenile services has a pickup order that sticks. I make sure you disappear entirely." His eyes moved to her bag on the curb. "That's everything you own right there. I can take it, or I can give you more." Lily looked at him. My mother filed a housing application 2 years ago, she said. Her voice didn't shake. You denied it in 4 days. Vander's face shifted. Not guilt, something more specific. Recognition. The involuntary acknowledgement of a man who knows the file she's describing. You know what happened after that, she said. You know where she ended up. Vander exhaled slowly through his nose. I don't know what you... I'm not asking you to confirm it, Lily said. I'm telling you I know, because you should understand exactly what it is I'm not going to walk away from. There was a moment, just a second, where Vander looked at her the way he should have looked at Owen on the street behind the grocery store. Like she was real, like she was a person whose weight had to be factored into any equation that included her. Then it passed. He nodded at the man on his right. The man's hand came out from near his waistband. The gun didn't point at anyone's chest. It pointed at the ground in front of Lily's feet, angled just enough upward that the message was specific and clear and professional. Not theatrical, functional. Give him the phone, Vander said to Everett. No, Everett said. Now. Touch me or my device, Everett said, and you're committing robbery and obstruction on a recording that is already uploading to multiple locations simultaneously. Vander looked at the phone, at the red recording indicator, at the small upload symbol in the corner of the screen. That meant the file was live, going somewhere not containable by taking the device. Something shifted in his calculation. The math changed, and he didn't like the new numbers. Then Everett raised his voice, clear, flat, loud enough for anyone within 50 yards to hear. Help, gun, public sidewalk. The three words cracked the air like something thrown at glass. And then from behind the buildings, from the parallel streets, from the intersection at the end of the block, the engines answered. Not a roar, not an assault. A presence building from a murmur into a certainty, the way a weather system builds inevitable and total. Headlights swept the end of the street. The first bike came around the corner, slow and deliberate. Then two more. Then the black pickup rolling up behind them, like a period at the end of a sentence. Vander's eyes went to the bikes. Then back to Lily. The calculation was running fast behind his face now, inputs changing faster than he could adjust. The armed man's hand came up, a fraction reflex. Not decision, the body doing something the mind hadn't fully authorized. Duke stepped out of the pickup. He walked toward Vander's men with his hands visible and open and his eyes locked on the gun. He didn't hurry, he didn't slow down. He said one thing in a voice that had always lived in this specific kind of moment. Put it away. The armed man looked at Duke Harlan, at the breath of him, at the ink running from his hands to his shoulders, at the thing behind his eyes that wasn't anger and wasn't calculation, but was simpler and older and more final than either, and the moment balanced. Then Vander said, take the phone. The armed man stepped toward Everett. A rider materialized between them instantly, palms up, not touching, just occupying the space. Another rider appeared at Lily's side shoulder, angled slightly forward. Vander's voice dropped. Just for Lily. You think this ends here? Lily looked at him steadily. I think it ends in a courtroom, she said, and I think you know what's on the footage from the pawn shop. Vander went still. That was the tell, not what he said, which was nothing but the stillness itself, the half second where the phrase pawn shop landed somewhere behind his eyes, and he couldn't entirely stop the reaction from reaching his face. Otis Webb's backup hard drive, the lightning frame, his own face behind rain-streaked glass. Then Vander reached down and grabbed the coil of chain lying on the sidewalk beside Lily's bag. He swung it toward the drain like he was trying to get it away from the light, away from the cameras, away from the record. Duke's voice came from 10 feet away, quiet and absolute. You just touched your own evidence. Vander stopped with the chain hanging from his hand. He looked at Duke, he looked at Everett's phone, he looked at the riders standing in the streetlight, with their own phones raised, a dozen small lenses, steady and unblinking, aimed at him from every angle, with the specific patience of people who understood that documentation was the most powerful thing happening on this block right now. He let the chain drop. It hit the sidewalk with a sound that meant something beyond its physical weight. Then the sirens started. Two cruisers coming fast from the direction of the county building. Vander's men moved. Vander walked to the SUV without running, maintaining the performance of control to the last possible moment. He got in, and before the door closed, he looked back at Lily one final time, and it was not the look of a man who had lost. It was the look of a man who had decided to change terrain. The SUV peeled out as the first cruiser rounded the corner. Lily stood on the wet sidewalk with the recording still running and the chain lying at her feet and the smell of exhaust and rain and drain water around her. And she watched the county vehicle disappear and understood with the specific clarity that comes from having lived long enough in dangerous proximity to a system that the worst of it was not behind her. It was about to put on a suit and walk into a courtroom and try to look reasonable. But standing here on this block at this moment with Duke Harlan behind her and Everett Quill still recording and the echo of a dozen engines settling into the quiet around her, she was not alone. For the first time in a long time, she was genuinely not alone. And she was beginning to understand that this changed the math entirely. The night before the hearing, nobody slept well except Owen. Owen slept the way 8-year-olds sleep when the immediate danger has passed and the adults around them are still carrying it completely deeply with one hand curled under his cheek and his small chest rising and falling in the so trusting rhythm of someone who has decided the world is being handled and that the handling is in capable hands. Elena Harlan sat beside him in the warehouse's back room with her hand resting on his shoulder, and every 20 minutes or so, she would look up at the door as if checking that it was still there, still closed, still between her son and whatever was outside it. Lily sat at the desk in the trailer office and watched Everett work. He worked the way surgeons work, not fast, but precise, with the particular economy of motion that comes from knowing exactly what matters and having no attention left over for anything that doesn't. He had 4 files open on his tablet and 2 phones on the desk, and a legal pad covered in handwriting so small it looked like a different language. He made calls in low-clipped bursts. He uploaded files and confirmed receipt and uploaded them again to different addresses. He built a record the way you build something meant to outlast the people who want to tear it down one stone at a time, each one placed, so that removing it would require removing everything adjacent. At some point, Duke came in and set a cup of coffee on the desk in front of Lily without being asked and without saying anything. He stood at the window for a while looking at the fence line and the dark beyond it, and then he said, still looking at the window, not at her, "You don't have to speak tomorrow if you don't want to. Everett can present the evidence." Lily wrapped both hands around the cup. "I know, but you're going to anyway." It wasn't a question. She didn't answer it like one. "She never got to say anything," Lily said. "My mom, nobody ever asked her what she wanted or what happened or what she needed. She just got a form letter with a signature on it and a reason that wasn't really a reason." She looked at the coffee. "I'm going to say something." Duke was quiet for a moment. His reflection in the dark window was still steady. Then he said, "Okay." One word in his particular voice carrying the specific weight of a man telling you he'll be standing where you can see him when you do it. Morning arrived cold and clear. The storm's aftermath burned off overnight, leaving a sky the color of old tin and air that sharpened inside your nose. Everett handed Lily a clean button-down shirt and a jacket that fit well enough. She put them on without comment, understanding what they were for. Not disguise, not pretense. Just the 2 or 3 seconds of benefit of the doubt that clothing could buy in a room full of people who made decisions about you before you opened your mouth. 2 or 3 seconds could be enough. They drove to the courthouse in the plain sedan, no convoy, no announcement. They turned the last corner and Lily understood what a lot meant. The courthouse sat on the corner of Harlow's 2 main streets, a flat-faced brick building with wide steps and American flags that were still heavy with moisture from the storm and hung close against their poles. On any regular morning, there might be a handful of vehicles in the lot, a few people on the steps, the ordinary quiet traffic of county business. This morning, the street on both sides of the building was lined with motorcycles. Not a few, not a dozen. Row after row of bikes parked with the geometric precision of people who had done this before and understood that what they were communicating had to be communicated clearly and without ambiguity. They stretched from the intersection all the way to the far end of the block and doubled back along the side street, and beside each one stood a person, mostly men, some women wearing cuts and jackets and riding gear, or just plain clothes standing with hands in pockets or arms folded, or coffee cups in hand, faces quiet and attentive, watching the courthouse steps without any of the posturing that announces violence, Yaman. Just watching, just present, just there as a fact that couldn't be ignored or edited or explained away. A local church group had set up a folding table on the sidewalk with a coffee urn and paper cups and a hand-lettered sign that said, "Support our witness." A man with a cardboard box labeled "Legal Fund Cash Only" had it already stuffed with bills. A woman in a gray nurse's jacket stood near the bottom of the courthouse steps with a paper cup of water in her hand. Lily saw the banner stretched between two lampposts above the street. White background, black paint, two words and a number. 900 witnesses. She stopped walking. Everett stopped beside her and waited because he understood that some things needed a moment before you could move through them without losing something in the transit. Lily looked at the rows of bikes, at the people standing beside them who had come some through the night, some from other counties because they had heard that a 17-year-old girl with no address and no last name on any official record had pulled a child out of a locked drain in a storm and been put in handcuffs for it. They had come because the kind of person who does what Lily did deserved to have people standing where they could be seen in the daylight when the system tried to decide she didn't exist. The nurse at the bottom of the steps was the same nurse from the hospital 2 nights ago, the one who had cleaned Lily's palm and pressed gauze over the cut and murmured, "You did the right thing," in a voice too quiet for the officers to hear. She stepped forward as Lily approached and held out the paper cup the way you offer water to someone who needs it without ceremony and without wanting anything back for it. Lily took it with both hands. The cup shook slightly. The water didn't spill. Some of the riders near the steps nodded as she passed. Not applause, not salute, just a specific nod that means "I see you and I am not going to pretend otherwise." The simplest form of acknowledgement. It hit Lily somewhere between the sternum and the throat in a way that made the next 10 steps harder than they should have been, for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. She kept walking. She kept her face still. She thought about her mother. Inside the courthouse hallway was dense with deputies and low voices, and the particular tension of a building that was supposed to contain something ordinary and was failing at it. Sheriff Boyd Pruitt stood near the courtroom door with his county attorney beside him, both of them watching Lily and Everett come down the hall with the expressions of men who have spent 12 hours looking for higher ground and discovered that the water found it before they did. Pruitt's eyes moved briefly to the window at the end of the hall toward the muffled sound of idling engines that reached even this far inside the building, and then back to Lily. He said nothing. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and his jaw was set, and he was performing a composure he hadn't actually located. They tried to stop her at the courtroom door. A deputy said no minors beyond this point without a verified guardian. Everett produced the court-appointed placement order and his bar card in the same motion the way a man produces documents he has been carrying specifically because he knew this moment was coming. The deputy stepped aside. Inside the courtroom felt wrong, too small for what was happening. Outside its walls, too ordinary, with the same wooden benches and fluorescent lighting and faint smell of old varnish that every county courtroom in America shares regardless of what has been decided inside its walls. Cole Vander was not present. His chair at the county's table was empty. His absence said something specific. Pruitt sat with the county attorney and did not look at Lily when she came in. Judge Abigail Whitmore entered and the room rose. She was in her 60s with cropped gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, and the manner of a woman who had been presiding over this particular courtroom long enough that she no longer felt any need to establish her authority over it. She simply had it the way rivers have direction, without effort and without exception. She looked at the room, at Pruitt, at Everett, at Lily. Her gaze on Lily lasted one beat longer than the others, not with sympathy, not with softness, but with the focused attention of someone deciding what category a thing belongs to and wanting to be accurate before making the decision permanent. She sat. Everyone sat. "We are here," Judge Whitmore said, "because a minor witness has filed a statement supported by counsel alleging that a child was deliberately trapped in a county storm drain during a severe weather event, and that subsequent to rescuing that child, the witness was subjected to unlawful detention, witness intimidation by text message, a vehicular assault on a public street, and an armed threat by an individual in the company of a county employee." She looked over her reading glasses at the room with the patience of someone who has heard every variety of excuse and is not planning to hear this one slowly. "The county has had 12 hours to prepare a response. Let's hear it." The county attorney stood and began a sentence about procedural irregularities and the inherent complexity of evaluating events that occurred during a severe weather emergency. Judge Whitmore let him speak for 40 seconds. "Sit," she said, not loud, not unkind, simply finished with that. Everett went first. He placed the evidence in front of the court the way you lay cards on a table when you know what you're holding, without drama, without performance, with the clean confidence of someone who has spent 2 days making sure every piece connects to every other piece without a gap between them. The photographs of the scrape marks on the grate multiple impacts clustered fresh silver through old rust. The photograph of the gray concrete dust along the curb edge recently poured, not weather-worn. The hardware store receipt chain and padlock cash transaction purchased 3 days before the storm at a store outside the county line with no camera at the register. The county fleet registration tying vehicle plate 73J 942 to Colvander Infrastructure and Drainage Oversight. The incorporation records for two shell companies, Meridian Infrastructure, LLC, and Harlow Basin Partners, both traced through a registered agent to co-investors Boyd Pruitt and Colvander, both holding equity positions in Creston Civil's Clement Street project. The threatening text message time-stamped and traced. The audio recording of Vander's coercion attempt on the sidewalk. The video from the confrontation gun visible, Vander's face visible, Vander's hands on the chain. Then Everett played the footage from Otis Webb's backup drive. The courtroom monitor flickered and settled. Rain and darkness and the wet curb of Route 9 in the middle of a storm that had flooded the streets and filled the drains and sent a child's cries up through a locked iron grate. The image was grainy, shot through with static, the colors shifted and uncertain. But it was real in the specific way that actual recorded footage of actual events is always real without the clean edges that imagination gives things. The white county truck, lights off, sitting at the curb in front of the drain, positioned there, the engine running, the driver's window up, sitting the way something sits when it is not parked but placed. Then the lightning, one hard white total flash that lit the street with the brutal clarity of something that doesn't negotiate, and in that single frame, through the rain-streaked windshield, a face. The county attorney began a sentence about image quality and visual identification standards. Judge Whitmore said, "I can see the face." The county attorney sat down. Owen testified from the stand with his hands wrapped in his hoodie sleeves and his eyes on the judge, and he told the truth the way children tell the truth when they have decided that the person across from them deserves it completely, in order, without embellishment or strategic omission. The gray substance being poured into the channel behind the grocery store. The workers in the dark. The man who came out of the white truck and looked at him. The way that look had felt. The way he'd run. The way the rain had closed in around him, and he ducked into the drain to wait it out. The sound of the chain going through the bars. The sound of the lock clicking shut. The laugh. He said that last part quietly, the word almost disappearing into the room's silence. And the courtroom went quiet with him, in the way that rooms go quiet when a child describes something that should never have been done to a child. Pruitt's hand resting on the table opened and closed once. Then it was Lily's turn. She walked to the witness stand and the deputy swore her in with the practiced detachment of someone who performs this function many times each day, and she sat down. For a moment, she just looked at the room, at the wooden benches, at the county attorney with his folders, at Pruitt, not meeting her eyes, at Everett, standing near the wall with his tablet, at Duke Harlan in the back row, arms folded, beard against his chest, eyes on her face. Steady, present, exactly where he'd said he'd be. She told the truth. She started at the beginning. The overpass, the rain, the sound that came from the wrong direction at the wrong time. She told it in order, and she told it plainly without reaching for sympathy or performing any version of herself designed to make anyone in the room more comfortable with what they were hearing. She laid it down the way Everett had laid the documents down, piece by piece, each one connecting to the next, the chain of it visible if you were willing to look. The chain, the padlock, the concrete block in the seventh strike, the rebar. Owen's foot in the dark, the water at her waist and the current pushing at her shoulder, and the cold that went past temperature into something that felt like the tunnel claiming her. She told it through the handcuffs outside and the statement she'd refused to sign, and the detective who'd written Doe next to her name like an insult. Through the truck that had jumped the curb that morning with her cheek in its sights. threw the gun on the sidewalk that evening and the chain Vander had picked up and dropped. She told it without looking at Pruitt and without looking at the county attorney and without performing anything for anyone. When she finished, Judge Whitmore was quiet for a moment. The courtroom held the quiet the way a room holds heat. Then the judge said, "Ms. Ward, after everything that was done to you in the 48 hours following your rescue of this child, the detention, the intimidation, the threats, the assault, why did you keep showing up?" The courtroom was very still. Lily thought about all the things she could say. She thought about the signature on the denial form. She thought about the laugh in the dark. She thought about 2 years of making herself invisible enough to fit in the spaces a world leaves when it forgets you're in it. Because Owen was 8 years old, she said, and somebody decided that meant nobody would care. The courtroom made a sound, not applause, nothing that simple, just the involuntary release of breath that happens when a room full of people finally hears said clearly something they already knew. Judge Whitmore held Lily's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she turned. "Sheriff Pruitt," she said, "did your office issue a juvenile pickup order for this witness after she had been released under a court-sponsored temporary placement?" Pruitt looked at his hands. The county attorney leaned close to him and said something with his mouth barely moving. "Yes or no," the judge said. The county attorney started, "Your Honor, with respect." "I'm asking the sheriff," Judge Whitmore said. "Sheriff, yes or no?" Pruitt looked up. He looked at the county attorney. He looked at the window toward the steady sound of engines outside that had been there since before the hearing started. He looked at the footage frozen on the courtroom monitor, the lightning frame Vander's face behind the glass. The unambiguous fact of it. He looked at everything available to him and found nothing that helped. "Yes," he said. The room exhaled. And then Boyd Pruitt, having run his calculation and found Vander on the wrong side of the ledger, said what a man says when the structure he's been standing on begins to give way beneath him, and he needs to find something solid before it goes completely. He said that the pickup order had been requested by Cole Vander and that he had approved it as a professional courtesy between county offices. He said that Vander had represented it as a standard welfare check on an unaccompanied minor. He said that he had not been aware his exact words chosen carefully and delivered to the court reporter that the minor in question was a material witness to Vander's presence at the storm drain on the night of the incident. He said it clearly. He said it on record. Everett didn't react visibly. He just made a small note on his legal pad and continued standing exactly where he was. The county attorney tried 3 more times and was declined twice and overruled once. Judge Whitmore let the record accumulate without rushing it, building it the way you build something meant to stand after the people who tried to prevent it have finished failing. Then she lifted the gavel. "It is the finding of this court," she said, "that the minor witness before us is a protected witness in an active investigation, that all detention efforts directed at her person in the 48 hours following the rescue were procedurally improper and constituted witness intimidation under state statute. That probable cause exists for charges of obstruction, criminal conspiracy, and abuse of county authority against Cole Vander, and pending further review additional parties." A pause measured and deliberate. "The court further finds that the rescue performed by this witness was an act carried out in good faith under emergency conditions, and that no criminal liability attaches to her actions in any regard." Another pause. "Deputy Inspector Vander is ordered to appear before this court by end of business today. A warrant for his arrest will issue upon his failure to appear. The Creston Civil Project on Clement Street is suspended pending environmental and structural review by state inspectors. Sheriff Pruitt's office is placed under the State Conduct Review, effective immediately." She lifted the gavel and brought it down. The sound it made was not theatrical. It was just a gavel striking wood. But in the particular silence of that courtroom after everything that had been said and shown and recorded, it landed like the closing of something that had been standing open for a long time, a door that had been swinging on bad hinges for years, finally latched. What happened next came in 2 pieces arriving within the hour. The first piece came from Gus Merritt, who had stayed at the warehouse during the hearing and called Everett's phone as they were walking out of the courtroom. His voice was level, without inflection or ceremony, the voice of a man delivering facts. State investigators had arrived at the Creston Civil site on Clement Street 40 minutes ago, following an environmental complaint filed the previous evening by Everett's federal contact. They had found evidence of improper concrete pouring into the stormwater drainage channel consistent with deliberately rerouting flood risk flow to protect the eastern parcel in which Vander and Pruitt held equity while redirecting that risk toward the lower residential blocks to the west. They had found a burn barrel behind the site trailer with partially destroyed documents matching Crestonsville's internal permit files. And they had found Cole Vander. He had been in his truck, the white utility vehicle, county seal on the door plate, 73J-942, on the service road on the north side of the property, attempting to reach the county line. A state patrol vehicle had been positioned there since 7 that morning, following a tip from Everett's federal contact filed the previous night. Vander had been stopped, identified, and taken into custody without incident. Without incident. The phrase landed in Lily's mind with a strange weight. The entire 3 days, the lock and the water and the handcuffs and the truck mirror and the gun on the sidewalk and the text message and the coercion attempt, and it ended with a white county truck stopped by a patrol car on a gravel service road behind a grocery store in Harlow, Oklahoma on a clear morning. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just stopped. Sometimes that was what the end of a thing looked like. The second piece was quieter. Back at the warehouse in the trailer office, Everett set a thin piece of laminated card on the desk in front of Lily and slid it across to her. He didn't frame it, didn't announce, it didn't do anything that would make it harder to receive. It was a temporary state identification card. Her photograph taken that morning at a county services office, her face still showing the small taped cut on her cheek where Vander's mirror glass had caught her. Her name printed clean and unambiguous in black ink on a white background. Lily Ward, no doe, no unknown, no conditional status or qualifier or footnote, just her name on an official government-issued document belonging to her stating that she existed in the same factual register as everyone else with the same kind of proof attached to it. She looked at it, she picked it up. It weighed almost nothing. Lighter than the duct tape on her bag strap, lighter than the mailing list card from the library, lighter than a granola bar or a paper cup of water, lighter than almost everything she had carried in the past 2 years, which made the weight she felt when she held it, the weight that had nothing to do with grams, seem almost unreasonable. "My mom," she said. Her voice came out lower than she intended. They never gave her one of these, not at the end. She had one before when things were different, but it expired and she couldn't renew it because she didn't have an address to put on the renewal form. She stopped, steadied herself against something that didn't have a name but had a specific pressure behind the eyes. She would have liked to see this. No one in the room said anything that would make it smaller or easier or more manageable than it actually was. Duke, standing near the trailer door, did not say she's watching or she knows or any of the things people say when they are trying to be kind, but are actually trying to manage their own discomfort by making the grief into something resolvable. He simply stood there, and his right thumb moved once across the old scar on the back of his left hand, slow, deliberate, and then was still. Lily set the ID on the desk beside the piece of broken padlock she had been carrying in her pocket since the night the storm drain gave it to her. She looked at both of them for a moment, the jagged metal fragment and the clean laminate card, the thing that had trapped and the thing that named. Then she left the padlock on the desk and put the card in her pocket. Some things you carry because you have to. Some things you put down because you finally can. Knowing the difference was something you learned slowly and then all at once. 3 days later, Lily Ward stood on the sidewalk in front of Duval and Sons Auto Repair on the south side of Harlow, reading the hand-lettered sign on the door that said Apprentice Program Ask inside. She was wearing the jacket from the courthouse. Work boots that were finally genuinely actually dry, a detail so ordinary that it should not have mattered and somehow mattered in a way that was disproportionate to its size, the way small, ordinary comforts often do when you've been without them long enough. Her ID was in her left breast pocket. Her hands were empty. Inside the garage smelled like motor oil and rubber and the metallic compound of work that had been done in the same space by people who knew what they were doing day after day, year after year, until the work was in the walls. Tools hung on pegboard along the near wall, organized by type and size with the arrangement of someone who took the logic of things seriously and expected others to do the same. A radio somewhere in the back was playing something that wasn't quite country and wasn't quite classic rock, the specific genre of sound that belongs to American garages at any point across the last 50 years, like it was invented for the purpose. Hank Duvall looked up from an engine bay. He was in his 60s, gray-haired with grease on his forearms, in the hands of someone who had spent a working lifetime making things that were broken function again. His face was the face of a man who had seen most of what humans were capable of and reserved his judgments about all of it until he had specific reason to pass them. He looked at Lily. "You, Lily," he said. "Yes, sir." He nodded once, the nod of a man receiving information he already had some reason to expect, and wiped his hands on a shop rag and jerked his chin toward the long metal workbench along the wall where a tray of socket wrenches had been laid out with no particular order, loose and intermixed, waiting for someone to take them seriously. "Start with those," he said. "Sort them by drive size, then metric versus standard within each group. Take your time. Do it right the first time." "Okay," she said. "When you're done, tell me what you learned." She looked at the tray. From sorting sockets. He looked at her steadily over the edge of the engine bay, the look of a man deciding whether someone is asking a genuine question or a rhetorical one. "From paying attention," he said. "There's a difference." Lily walked to the bench. She picked up the first socket, 3/8 drive metric, the size stamped into the chrome in small, clean numbers, and placed it at the left end of the tray. Then the second, then the third. Outside across the street, she heard it before she looked low, steady, unhurried, the specific idle of a single motorcycle engine. She turned her head just enough to see through the garage's open bay door. A single bike was parked at the curb on the opposite sidewalk, and Duke Harlan was sitting on it with his helmet resting on the tank in front of him and his forearms resting on the handlebars and his eyes on the garage door. Not 20 riders, not a row of bikes, just him. Just present the way a person is present when they have chosen to be somewhere and mean it. When her eyes found his across the street, he gave her one nod, the same nod from the courthouse steps, the same nod from the hospital hallway. No ceremony, no production, no performance for anyone watching. Just the acknowledgement of one person to another that says, "I see where you are. I think you're going to be all right." Then he looked away, down the road. At the flat Oklahoma horizon past the far end of Harlow's Main Street, the sky broad and wide and already clearing toward something that wasn't a promise but wasn't a threat either. Just open, just weather doing what weather does when it's done with one thing and hasn't started the next. Lily turned back to the workbench. She picked up the next socket, found its size, placed it. The radio played something she didn't know the name of. Hank moved somewhere deeper in the garage, his boots steady on the concrete floor, the rhythm of a person working at something they understand completely. Outside, occasional traffic passed on the street. The engine of Duke's bike ticked quietly as it cooled away metal contracts after heat settling into the temperature of the surrounding air, becoming part of whatever it's resting in. She worked her way through the tray socket by socket, size by size, each one turned in her fingers, until she found the number stamped into it. Each one placed in its correct position relative to the ones beside it, the small, clean logic of it accumulating into something that looked like order, like a system that made sense, like a set of parts that knew where they belonged. For the first time in 2 years, the quiet around her wasn't the quiet of invisibility. The careful, deliberate survival required silence of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible so the world has less to push against. It was just quiet, the ordinary workable quiet of a morning when the worst has already happened and the next thing, whatever it turns out to be, hasn't started yet. She kept her hands moving. She kept going.